Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the post-lunch panel. We're going to do our best to have some lively conversation and keep you awake. We are here to discuss enhancing integrity of markets through the use of tech and the opportunity to do that and scale it. We've got three fantastic speakers today joining me up here, and I'm really excited that they are all from the natural and working land space. And of course, natural and working lands is a place where you get the biggest bang for your buck in the carbon markets, and you get not just what you're going after, but all those other socio-ecological benefits that you want to get on the landscape. So I'm really, really happy that our panel is all from that space. No shade on other space, but I just think this is the best one. So my name is Ashley Conrad-Saydah. I'm the Chief Policy and Community Affairs Officer at Vibrant Planet, a public benefit corporation, like Chris down there. I'm on the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency Board and a Sandia National Labs Board too, where we work really, really hard to advance climate investments that provide more than just that dollar's value, but all the broad values that climate investments bring. I'm joined today by Sassan. He's the CEO of CTrees.org and a really close partner of Vibrant Planets and someone we just really enjoy working with. Adam Moreno, manager of nature-based strategies for the California Air Resources Board and someone who's been in the space for a long time. And Chris Tolles, who's the co-founder and CEO of Yardstick, another public benefit corporation. So we're going to talk today. Each of them will present how they're already increasing integrity in the market and moving to scale with the work that they're doing, and just getting into some of the friction that we find in trying to deploy technologies and trying to deploy software in the nature-based solution space. So we're going to go down the line and just give a little bit of an opening from each of them, and then we'll get into a series of questions, and then I'll open it up to all of you. I really encourage Q&A, and if you have a burning question while we're talking, raise your hand, and we'll see if we can squeeze it in. So Sassan, I'm going to start with you. If you can open with who you are, what CTrees does, and what you're already doing to really improve scale and enhance integrity in the market.
Good. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sassan Saatchi, and I am the CEO now of CTrees, but I come from a background of science, so I would like to make that distinction that when we think about technology, we also think about science and technology. I've worked and still working for 30 years now at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. I've been associated with UCLA Institute of Environment and Sustainability. I have worked mainly in the forest domain for all this period, looking at the tropical forest, looking at the carbon dynamics of forest and the impact of the climate on these forests, and then developing data products that includes both from inventory measurements and satellite data and remote sensing to solve climate problems, and can be local and can be also global. So my interest is to really solve this problem globally, because we think that, and that was the motivation for CTrees, that almost 80% of the interaction of the land with the atmosphere in terms of carbon comes from trees and forest. And that 80% includes a huge amount of emission to the atmosphere, which, if you really think about the gross number, is half of what we put in the fossil fuel to the atmosphere. So it's a large emission. And if you look at all the land use changes, deforestation, fires, it makes it a big, significant emission. So one of the goals for us was to identify and quantify the emission and also find ways to reduce it. And the other portion of this whole problem is a huge sink in the forest. And so not only we can reduce the emissions, but we have now an opportunity, by looking at the land, to actually sequester carbon and remove carbon from the atmosphere. So this was kind of the motivation for us to develop an NGO, nonprofit group called CTrees, with some of our collaborators, some postdocs, students who graduated, and also colleagues in academia, to see how we can actually operationalize science results into actionable products by bringing technology. And by technology, I mean looking at the observation, so we can have our solutions mainly based on observation, to use AI and other techniques to scale up which is extremely necessary, and also to be really vigilant in quantifying uncertainty and bringing that as a part of the whole solution, so it can be used in terms of how we can improve and reduce that uncertainty going forward, or use it as a risk whenever we are making investments. So I'm going to stop here, and then we can talk about the details later.
Great. Adam, over to you.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I'm Adam Moreno, and as Ashley said, I'm the manager of nature-based strategies at the California Air Resources Board. And I guess it's important to remember, here the folks you hear from are typically working on policy and stuff, but really a base requirement to get a job at CARB is to be a scientist or engineer. So we're always working on science and engineering in what we do, and so you hear from Rajinder or Matt, or even Leanne, in their talks that we're a data and science-driven organization, and so that's where I come in. That's part of my job, is to create, synthesize, analyze, and then make sense of all the science and data that's out there that then we use to make our policy. So, so in terms of the California context, some of you may be familiar with our 2022 scoping plan. The scoping plan is the state's roadmap for fighting climate change across all sectors of the California economy. And this last scoping plan was the first one to include natural and working lands. And so it was my job, along with others, to bring this sector up to the scientific and technical level where we could include lands as an official part of the state's strategy to becoming carbon neutral. And so we did that by creating models, using remote sensing data, things like that, looking at what's already out there, and contacting others to help us along the way. And so through that process, we set a carbon target for natural and working lands, which is actually 4% carbon stocks below 2014 levels by 2045. So, and that's because all of our models indicate we're going to lose carbon going into the future, pretty much no matter what we do. This is a caused by drought-induced mortality, lowering our photosynthetic capacity, also wildfires, of course, and things of that nature. But that's not to say there's nothing there's not things we can do about it, right? So we also are using this information to accelerate climate action in this space, and to limit the losses as much as we can. And also, that's not to say that you can't also have good carbon projects within California, right? So when we talk about losing carbon, it's across every square inch of California. So there can still be pockets that we need to conserve and preserve as essentially like strategic carbon reserves within California. And so, yeah, to do all of this work, clearly it needs a lot of model development and using the most remote sensing data that we possibly can. But there's also another place for technology, which is in the carbon dioxide removal space. And there's a lot of sort of blurred lines between what's an engineered solution and what's a nature-based solution in this space. So you can think about like a lot of the marine solutions that are being created out there to make water more alkaline to sequester more carbon. Using water to sequester carbon, is that nature-based or is it engineered? I don't know. And or some of the enhancements in agricultural soils to sequester more carbon also kind of blurs those lines. So there's a lot of room for technology that we're assessing and figuring out how to bring into our overall strategies into the future. And but it's also important to remember that from a CARB perspective, especially in natural and working lands, carbon is an important factor, but is not the only issue that we're looking at. It's not just about sequestering and storing more carbon. In fact, it's not our goal to sequester and store as much carbon as humanly possible in the state, because there's a trade-off, right? These are ecological systems. Some places we need to remove carbon, right? We need to reduce our fuels to prevent catastrophic wildfire in California's forests. That's going to lose carbon. But of course we want to do that. We want to restore wetlands. That's going to produce more methane, but of course we still want to restore wetlands. And we need better empirical methods to be measuring these things, right? So remote sensing and models can only take you so far, but we need more and more innovative ways to actually measure these things on the ground so that we can scale them up and we can make better models going into the future. Some of the things that we're working on now in terms of, pushing for better technology in this space is, since we're here talking about markets mainly, we have a contract that we're currently working on. We're working on improving our risk rating system for our compliance offset market to take it better into account, disturbances that may occur. And this is also using, the latest in models and remote sensing to do that work. Also, we have an RFP out right now. I think there's still time to put in for it if you want to create a new cropland carbon monitoring system for California. And modeling system as well. And then also we're pushing on being able to project air quality impacts of all our nature-based solutions. And most importantly, most exciting to me is we are creating a whole new section. We have a lot more resources to bring on more scientists, more engineers to build this work out and do even better in the future. So that's it. Thanks.
Over to you, Chris.
My name is Chris. I'm the CEO of Yardstick. My company measures soil carbon with spectroscopy, which is this thing. The nice thing about not only being a software company is I have things, so you can come look at the thing afterwards if you want. We're replacing laboratory analysis for soil carbon with in situ spectroscopy, which is, again, this thing. I don't have a background in any of this. I went to art school, but I'm good at turning science into companies. I'm the CEO. I live in Boston. We work on cropland and grazing land primarily across the U.S. In fall 2023 alone, we were Maine to Washington State to New Mexico to Arkansas on a bunch of hundreds of thousands of acres. That's what we do, measure soil organic carbon stocks more cheaply.
Great. Thank you all. So I want to talk about, the topic of this panel, the speed, scale, integrity, and opportunity. We heard that we're using both advanced technology and empirical methods to ensure that what we're doing is really driving change on the ground. We mentioned words like risk and uncertainty. So I'm interested in what you all are doing to continue moving with speed, basically not waiting for uncertainty and risk to resolve, but continue to move with speed and at scale, even as science improves and technology improves. And I think for Sassan and Chris, right, it's how are you partnering? Who are you finding to use your outputs as you're trying to increase speed? And for Adam, how are you really able to advocate to decision makers who tend to be a little bit more hesitant around things that they can't see and touch right away? How are you really pushing on the speed side of things? And Chris, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so a few things. One is we think of this in terms of our brand voice. I think we try and be very candid about where we are and where we're not, and hold in tension the paradox of confidence that we will solve the problem and a real frank, candid acknowledgement with the criticism. A lot of people, especially I find in the nature-based space, want to read these criticisms and then write a rebuttal or fight back. And that's good if you disagree with points that are being made, but ultimately I think creates squabbling over an overall not very effective or important sector today. It's just not big enough or credible enough to have real impact in the world today. So instead what we focus on is yes, any article you read about soil carbon measurement being very difficult is true. We are just trying to solve that problem. And so holding that tension of open-handedness, not getting my feelings hurt when someone says soil carbon measurement is hard, and instead engaging that. Tactically, that means every time I read an article by a journalist about soil carbon measurement being hard, I email them and they say, great article, I'm trying to fix this, do you want to be friends? And 80% of the time they reply yes. And of that 80% of the time, 75% of the time, they're like, oh wow, this is really cool. And that wouldn't have happened if I had just quote tweeted their article and said, this person understands nothing because, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't work. Even if you're right. My mom always said you can be right or you can be helpful. And so we just try and engage a little more open-handedly with the acknowledged challenges here. The other thing is the last few years, especially in the startup tech world for climate, have been amazing years for a lot of money. And so a great way to go faster is to like have a lot more resources. Yardstick is risking an enormous amount of investor money pursuing a market that like may or may not be there in a few years. And that's like scary and weird, but to me, the alternative, which is, go slow, is unacceptable. And so I think I need to have the confidence as an entrepreneur to acknowledge that like right now, soil carbon in particular is in the trough of disillusionment, and nonetheless, like we are trying to push through that. The only reason we're able to do that is because we were willing to take a whole bunch of money from investors when it was a particularly hot topic. And now the challenge is, can we survive through that trough of disillusionment? All the more reason why, in that interim, our kind of brand voice needs to be around integrity, transparency, et cetera.
But Chris, you're getting both public funding and private funding for what you're doing. So, I mean, did the public funding come on the heels of the private funding or around the same time? Or?
No, the other way around. We got our first money was from ARPA-E in fall 2020, October 2020. That was a $3.6 million award, of which 1.5 was for Yardstick, and I used that to raise a $600K pre-seed round from investors because that was signaling to say like, hey, ARPA-E, they know what they're talking about, and they're going to give us a bunch of money. And it's been a really helpful back and forth where, whichever was the most recent money we raised is a proof point to the other group of stakeholders. When we get a bunch of USDA money, investors are like, oh yeah, this is real. And then when we get a bunch of investor money, ARPA-E is like, oh yeah, this is real. So it's it's classic chicken and the egg. Like if you can't get on that, how do you? But they've been enormously reinforcing both in terms of the credibility we have in market and the actual like cash flow reality of desperately needing a lot of money when you have uncertainty and a ton of tech risk, especially because famously like hardware is very hard.
Right. And now, Sassan, I mean, you bridge these worlds between NASA and CTrees. Like, how are you really addressing that what you're doing, you are moving fast. You are really trying to address uncertainty in the work that you're doing. How have you managed that bridging between sort of your public sector world and research that takes time and CTrees that's really trying to move faster and deploy?
I mean, that's a good question. I think our first focus is actually to bring data sets to the community, being policy community or carbon market community, that is already based on science. So there is a lot of scientific advancement on this whole issue of nature-based solutions, ecosystem services over the past, 20, 30 years. But within science or academia, we usually publish and then move into another thing. So the most important thing is to raise funds, both from private sector and possibly public, and I haven't really done that yet, but to bring that information to the community so they can actually have access to the data and improve whatever they're doing, being either on the market, in projects, or at the policy. And I want to emphasize that this speed thing is extremely important because the faster reliable data comes out and people can use it, the faster we can actually achieve things and also having an impact and therefore not having so much criticism going forward. And the data is important because now countries who signed for Paris Agreement, they're really interested to have data. We have a major problem within the IPCC community that the reports coming from the national governments to IPCC in terms of their LULUCF, land use change, and forestry, extremely different what the science community says. It's almost 6 billion tons of CO2 difference between two assessments. And so that means, and a lot of that, of course, comes from the global south, and those are the suppliers of the carbon to the carbon market. So if the data becomes available, and then the capacity of these countries increase and improve, therefore we can actually move forward. There are other things as well. I think one of the areas for us is to make sure what we know in the science also get into the methodologies and standards. I think this is a key important thing. We are also critical of standards, and not so much the carbon market standard, but even IPCC standards. Some of these guidelines in the standard are extremely old. It's based on 100 years of science, 60 years of science. It doesn't really use technology and advancement as fast as possible because those entities are like agencies move very slowly in terms of changing. So how do we really bring the community together to really improve these guidelines and methodologies? And that actually also impacts the criticism that exists now in the carbon market or any other transactions going on in the climate finance. So that's also another area that we are pushing forward, trying to influence. So not only data availability, but also making that happen in terms of methodology. Last but not least, we would like to be, CTrees especially, and other groups similar to us, we like to be at the position that we bring this information such that at the end of the year or 10 years or 30 years where we are trying to go to net zero, we would be able to say that we have achieved it. I mean, it's going to be, that's a daunting task where all these projects going on globally, all these carbons being credited, how do we add that up and really say that atmosphere has really seen that? And that's a major task, and we think that by bringing science and technology, we can do this scaling up and really inform the community. And the benefit of that is actually goes, just following what Adam says, it's not just carbon. Carbon is a key integrator of a lot of processes. It includes biodiversity, it includes carbon and water are extremely synced. And so if we improve this thing, I think there are co-benefits that comes to a lot of other part of the things that we want to change. Thanks.
Thanks. I mean, what you're both getting at is this idea of that really using this great science and technology to add integrity, right? To push back against the arguments that what we're doing amounts to nothing, right? And you know, California has a massive role to play because we've led the way in terms of the investments that we've made from a climate perspective. So what is the Air Board doing then to add to the idea that you need to push back against some of these arguments, move faster, you know, and embrace potentially new technology and science that's coming out in a way where California can lead the way and others can follow along?
Yeah, you know, I think we see ourselves, one of our roles is essentially to push people outside of their comfort zone, and that includes other agencies and federal agencies to say we're not doing enough. And so that's now the case for in the natural and working land space. So we're currently in the process of setting targets for climate action. So these aren't carbon targets. These are now like, you know, how much of certain sorts of nature-based solution practices do we want on every single landscape in California. And so, you know, there's a lot of discussions behind the scenes that make that happen. And it comes down to science and data that, you know, sort of wins the day in those discussions when there are disagreements about how much we should be doing and how much we should be pushing. When there's solid science and data to back you, it's much harder for folks to say that we shouldn't be doing something. So that's some of the stuff we're doing right now. So you can be looking forward to seeing these new targets sometime in the near future for the state of California. Those will be coming from the Natural Resources Agency in collaboration with us and CDFA. Additionally, of course, you know, we're a government agency, and so we have funds that we give out. So we also push in the direction using contracts, and that's also currently what we're doing. Like I was saying, with our risk rating contracts, you know, we're going to change the way that we measure risk for our compliance offset market, and also how we monitor like all of our systems in California. So sometimes, you know, other agencies or organizations, you know, might push back against us being able to monitor whole sectors in the entire state. But again, when we come back to the technology we're using, the science we're using, and the data we're using, it's much harder for them to argue about it when the science and data are solid. So the integrity of that science and data and the transparency of it and the openness of it also is super important. That's another piece too, is that how we help to accelerate innovation in this space is by pushing for transparency and openness, because that also spurs more development outside of what we pay for ourselves. So for example, like if there's a model, if we pay for the development of some model, we could keep that closed source and so nobody could use it. Or we could open up that code and now everybody has access to that code, and that spurs innovation that we don't even have to pay for. People will take it and make new versions and put new modules onto it that we can benefit from, and we don't even pay for it. They just do that on their own. So that's what we're hoping to see into the future. That's some of the stuff we're doing. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, a big part of our panel is about scale, right? And so how technology can really help with scale. And going from pilot projects, where a lot of us are in the climate tech world and in the nature-based climate world, to from these pilots to broader scale, really requires trust, a lot of money, and folks willing to kind of take the leap and go in with us. So how have you all found that the potential to go from pilots and getting started and using technology to be able to go bigger? How have you found that the world receives your new technology and with a willingness to go from those initial pilots into something much broader? And I think this question is probably more for Chris and Sassan, but Adam, from your perspective, I think it'll be really important to hear that, like, if you think about going bigger on nature in California, what are the things you're missing to get that done, and how can technology help you with that? So, Chris, do you want to get started on pilots and going bigger?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different forces that are either helpful or challenging about that. Many of our customers are stuck between the rock and a hard place of a SBTI-aligned net zero goal, or, for example, an analysis that shows that 90% of their emissions are scope 3, because they're a food product, and the front page of The Guardian. And they're like, shit, like, what do I do between these two things? Particularly in the current moment, something that is severely limiting the expansion of nature-based systems is the fact that we have Frontier, an advanced market commitment, that is an exceptionally well-marketed vehicle for high durability carbon removal, direct air capture and other, century millennial scale efforts. It's like $1 billion from a few tech companies, which is a lot of money, except it's actually tiny compared to a lot of the overall scale of existing carbon markets. And in my world, at least, which is admittedly just my sort of like climate tech bubble, they absolutely dominate the conversation. There is no singular voice for the role of nature-based solutions, full stop. And there is a singular voice for the role of higher durability, engineered, agreed the definitions are confusing. And so all my customers who want to, and actually do have appetite for risk, nonetheless look at The Guardian and say, like, I don't have appetite for that much risk. So an enormous enabler right now would be Frontier for nature-based solutions. And who's going to lead that is a challenging concept. There's very few organizations that act between these two worlds. Microsoft, laudable example. That is something that shows me that there's appetite for voluntary participation in climate solutions, and the headwinds that Frontier specifically presents for nature-based solutions, I think is an existential threat, at least on the kind of timeline of the next few years, that I don't see anybody solving, and that makes me very mad.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I feel like every time there's something new and sexy that people can point to and say, that's the silver bullet, it just takes attention away from these solutions that we know have worked for time immemorial. And so finding that voice together is clearly lacking.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to hold you to that language, but I wouldn't think about it in terms of like taking away. Like, I don't think this is zero sum.
Yeah.
This is a very, very small pie. Nature-based should not be fighting for its tiny piece of a tiny pie. Right. Instead of taking away, I think of it's just drawing the conversation towards that part of what's going on. When Frontier launched, I had this amazing Twitter exchange with Zeke, one of the guys that runs it, was running at the time. And I was like, this is so cool. When is there going to be Frontier for nature-based solutions? And he's like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. And I was like, oh, why? He's like, well, people already buy billions of dollars a year of nature-based stuff. And I was like, yeah, but like, it's kind of all shit, right? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, we were so close. Like, we were like right there. Like that's the opportunity. And the like white tech engineer mind, I think, just like fundamentally can't comprehend a lot of the complexity of nature systems. And that's understandable. Like, I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Like, I promise you, I don't like get nature as nearly as well as most of our customers do. But nonetheless, that is a prevailing attitude, and that was 3 years ago. And since then, like, who is expanding the conversation of, be it carbon removal, whatever you want to call it? I don't think of it as like we need to take that frontier energy back for us, but we need another 30x scale frontiers who are arraying money and enthusiasm across the full spectrum of durability, because as you pointed out, this is the only stuff we're going to get at scale in the next 20 years. Until there's unlimited zero carbon energy, DAC is pointless. We might get there, at which point we're going to be glad we had it, but there is no voice to, I would say, alongside frontier, advocate for the role of nature-based solutions compellingly.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Feel free
Thanks.
to clap. Yeah. I mean, lots of follow-ups that I would point to Adam to sort of address some of those criticisms too, right? Given like a 4% target in the scoping plan, that's minute compared to what the potential is, especially in a state of 100 million acres. But we'll get to that in a minute. Sassan, I mean, what's your reaction to that? The idea of scaling and what we need, and that tension between trying to get enough money to get to scale and trying to go from that pilot phase to something bigger. We've had fits and starts on this.
Well, that's a tough question. I think Chris said it. And it's really ironic that carbon capture, who wants to really solve the problem by saving the nature, doesn't really care as much that we're having nature-based solutions going forward. And I think it's going to be a difficult problem. And there are a few things that I can think of that may help us. One is, I think the global community is concerned about nature much more than the technology can solve the problem. So that might be an advantage to us. I mean, we now have much larger communities compared to 20, 30 years ago, where we would write science papers and almost nobody would read it. But now media comes and interviews us about the science that we are doing. So that's kind of an advantage to it. Now, how do we really going to bring that, compete with what Chris was saying? I think it's difficult. One is if we have cases which have been really effective and had an impact, and highlighting those, it actually gradually improves because the science is there. In fact, as you said, the community, scientific community believes that at least for the next 30 years, if we think that net zero is going to happen around 250 or 260, we would only need to do this through nature-based solutions because that technology is not easily to scale, the technology for carbon capture. At least it's not that level. That's more or less what we hear within the scientific community or what the publications. So I think how do we really highlight nature-based solutions? I think we just gotta develop those frontiers and advertise this. I think scaling is a good problem because the more we just go from experiences at the local scale and try to show the impact at the larger scale, and that can be, definitely technology can help. Remember, AI has captured the imagination. And during the Davos meeting, there was all these AI panels discussing how they can help the climate. And that's the frontier that we need to capture, and how AI scales nature-based solutions, and how do we really bring that thing into the community. But I don't know how do we really compete with other industries.
Okay, so Adam, putting you on the spot to think about California leading the way on scaling.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, we don't see any solution as a either or. We need all solutions on deck, right? And so when we're thinking about things like engineered CDR, something like that, to scale those, we are looking with a critical eye. You know, part of my job is to be skeptical about everything that comes across our desk. And so we have a vested interest in having that become like a thriving industry. And so we try to ask those tough questions today so that we can push those technologies into a viable industry into the future. In terms of nature-based solutions, we do everything with multiple scales in mind. In terms of being able to model and monitor natural and working lands in California, we're still in early years, even though that it's been, I've been working on it for, maybe 5-6 years in Air Resources Board. What we've been doing on the fossil side, on the AB 32 emission side, we've been doing those for decades now. And so, if you look back then, there was also a lot of those similar challenges to modeling and monitoring those systems back in those days, and that's where we're currently at with natural and working lands now. So we're going to be pushing to increase our level of integrity in all of our data products and our models at multiple scales, right? So not just at the statewide scale, but we also know we have to help counties do what they need to do to implement the work on the ground, because CARB is not going to implement the work on the ground. This is going to be other state agencies, it's going to be companies, it's going to be private landowners and counties and things like that. And so moving into the future, we're thinking about how do we make our work more applied to maybe not everybody, like used for planning on the ground, but at least for counties. And then we also know that we're very fortunate in California to have talent, have resources, and so just like with all the other sectors, right, we want to do the heavy lifting up front so that other states that only have 1-2 staff maybe that can think about this, take our work and then implement nature-based solutions in their state and push for it. So that's a couple of the ways that we're trying to scale things.
Yeah, I mean, and California really is helping to push on scaling, right? Because we're a big laboratory here that can be, exhibited elsewhere too.
Yeah.
So we all appreciate that. So, this is about the market, right? This discussion is supposed to be about how tech can enhance integrity and scaling in the market. So let's talk about the opportunity, right? So what are the biggest chances for us to go big on the solutions we're talking about? To push back on market naysayers, and does it mean we are still looking to markets as the solution? Does this mean we look away from markets as the solution? What's your takeaway on these guardian pieces and the hits that we've all been taking, and how the work that we're all doing can either enhance the market or augment it or something else entirely?
I can only speak for soil because that's the only thing I work in, but I would stop talking about carbon at all. I would talk about soil health and do we want to grow food? This is national security. It's, do you want to feed people? Do you want to feed people with a growing planet? We love this message of avoid carbon tunnel vision, and yet we're at a conference where the C stands for carbon. So in my world, I think there's, again, could be a trough of disillusionment moment, but troughs of disillusionment last a long time. There's overwhelming consensus that the CO2e economics of soil are going to be unacceptably weak for the foreseeable future. Indigo spent $2 billion trying to figure that out. And they're not dead, but it's hard, right? They're definitely not returning that money very successfully right now. Our primary scientific collaborator is called the Soil Health Institute and not the Soil Carbon Institute for a reason. Because if you farm corn in Iowa, you may not care about climate change. You absolutely care about soil health. And SHI's work looks at gross margin per acre. So ignore all the CO2e stuff and just put side by side a conventional system and what they call a soil health practices system. You call it regenerative, whatever. Greater gross margin per acre. Reduce input costs, reduce erosion, increase water infiltration, which means if you're a farmer and you want to make more money, here is a way to do it. Now, there's still huge barriers. How do you finance that transition is scary because yields can get hit, especially in the first few years. There's a lot of strong evidence that this is a bumpy transition. But my short answer is it's still the market, it's just not the market for carbon. People often perceive Yardstick as an offsets company because we do, God willing, enable high-quality soil carbon offsets, but our customers span land funds, food and ag brands, I would overwhelmingly discourage anyone trying to affect change at scale from hitching their cart singularly to the voluntary carbon market as a way to have impact at scale. At the very least, because in my math, By the time voluntary carbon market purchases get big enough to have real climate impact, they are also too big to be acceptable to a public company CFO. There's a contradiction in terms here. It's acceptable when it's a few million bucks for some good marketing, but when you actually look at the carbon footprint of any organization of scale in the world, by the time they're addressing the bulk of it with even high quality offsets, it is so much money that there's no way their shareholders will allow them to do that. They will clear the board, they will clear the CEO. That's why I think voluntary carbon market is an essential piece. It's an essential laboratory. There are some instances where it's going to be very important, but at least in the soil world, I'm totally convinced that an over-rotation on VCM is a death knell.
And Adam, how does that sit with you, thinking about, right, in the nature-based world, we do get all these socio-ecological benefits that aren't well measured right now and well reported on and aren't within a market system. And, at carbon is a lot of the currency, right? So how can you move from carbon as currency for the work that you do into a different kind of currency where you're really thinking about the broader socio-ecological benefits that accrue across multiple different sectors if you can focus on this work?
Yeah, so our message is you can't really separate the two. First and foremost, our objective is to create healthy and resilient ecosystems and communities. That is our number one priority for nature-based solutions in the state of California. However, once those are in place, then that will lead to more durable and persistent carbon stocks in the future. But you can't have durable and persistent carbon stocks unless public health and safety is already there. So you can't really separate the two. We have over 150 years of fire suppression that we have to deal with first, and then we can start thinking about really pushing on bringing up the bathtub ring of carbon across the whole entire state. Again, you can still have good carbon projects here and there. I'm thinking more on like the landscape scale. That's it.
Okay, thanks. And Sassan, so, answer however you want, but we started with this market premise. How is CTrees and how is your work thinking about engaging with the markets versus operating in a different space or some mix?
Good. So this is a question beyond my area of expertise. I've come from physics, but I want to just go beyond my area of expertise. I think climate change is here, and we need to solve this. So I think we create naturally a lot of dichotomies. Do we need to do policy or do we need to do market? Do we need to do top-down or bottom-up? Do we need to save trees or bring technologies, capture carbon? I think these dichotomies are extremely false, and it's actually slow us. So I want to stick with the message, we need to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, because that's the only way we can reduce temperature, we can bring climate in a condition that it would actually be well regulated. And the sooner we achieve this, the better it is. And we are living in a global world which is, it's globalized, it's capitalistic, which is basically work in the market and different types of market or regulations or unregulated market. So this is our reality. I think we need to make sure that we work with this reality and be innovative within this reality to solve the problem. We cannot just suddenly divide ourselves ideologically, or we don't believe in carbon market, therefore science community actually, or academia is a very negative, because academia is full of more left-oriented scientists, and they usually do not want to believe in carbon market. But everything we do is market-oriented. I remember the first time I went to Congo Basin to do field work. I was away from home for a month. I found a South African guy who was building roads, who had one of these Samsonite briefcases, which was his telephone. I paid him $100 to allow me to call my girlfriend back home. And now I go to exactly the same spot. My cell phone works. we didn't go through the process of development in there the same way we went here. Instead of building landlines, we actually introduced towers and cell phones to villages. So I think we need to really think out of the box in order to solve the problem and not divide ourselves that we won't talk about carbon. I think carbon is important. It's related in nature with a lot of other things. Carbon and water is linked. Carbon and ecosystem services are linked. We can be innovative to allow. And I think that following what Adam said, I think we need to have a healthy community and ecosystem. And sometimes you need to do that first to really get other things. Sometimes you can actually solve it from the other way around by actually introducing something else similar to the cell phone objective. I think we need to work with both cases. So my message is, in order to really bring the integrity in what we are doing, being carbon market or policies, we need to take the criticism that comes. I mean, most of the projects that we looked at, they have problems with the carbon credits. I mean, because this community that was using conservation ideas, helping the community, and suddenly introduced that as the carbon into the market, they never thought that these two are two different items, entities. All of them had like amazing intentions to go to the field, to have a project, to conserve forest, but they never thought that if you're bringing that to the market, being kind of virtual in reality, you need to have an integrity. We didn't think about it. And now with the criticism, we can actually improve our and go, not suddenly say, oh, carbon is not, we don't even use the word carbon. I think we should use the word carbon and actually reduce carbon in the atmosphere. That should be our goal. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you all. This was a lively and really good conversation leaving us with a lot of work to do, I think, right? And we already are doing a lot of work in this space, but opening the door for a lot of partnerships. And, I think most of us, all of our work is about partnerships, right? Between the public sector, the private sector, right? Just academia, other governments outside of the US too. Like that partnering is truly critical for what we do. So I'd say everyone in the room, please check out their websites, engage with all of us, understand the work that we're doing, think about how you can support and work with us too in all of these areas, and advance the way we measure the improvements that we're all making on the ground. So we have perfect time for questions. Before we do that, I just want to thank all three of these guys with a round of applause. Thank you so much. And I'm looking for hands. Any questions out there? Don't be shy.
Hey, my name's Leaf. Thanks for the panel. I had a question about the development of remote sensing models and the use of ground truth data collection. I wonder if you could just speak to what you think is like the trajectory in the development of these models, where we won't need to require huge amounts of data to be collected on the ground to actually come up with high quality estimates of impact on the ground. I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
A few years ago, we published a paper called How Do You Quantify Carbon in the Forest Without Doing Field Work? And using laser altimetry and some new techniques. I think what we know about the state of the art is remote sensing can definitely help a lot with the scaling. And that's important. In some areas, the trust is more on the inventory on the ground. But the inventory on the ground is extremely limited. So in order to really transition, we need to work with some measurements on the ground and then and move forward. The space agencies and remote sensing technologists have really acknowledged this. Between NASA and ESA, European Space Agency, in the past 15 years, they invested more than $2 billion for 3 instruments. One of them was JEDI that just flew, which measures LiDAR from space. And it does sampling exactly like inventory. 25-meter resolutions give you profiles of the structure. Well, I'm talking about forest. Soil, we still have problem to solve. And then NASA is having another system that is going to fly this year. It's called NISAR, and that's going to give you weekly observation every 10-meter globally to look at, it's a radar system, cloud-free, to look at the land use changes, to look at the biomass dynamics. And Europeans are building another mission which is called Biomass, and it's going to fly. And this is continuing over and over. There is a mission coming up, SBG, for doing biodiversity, looking at the spectroscopy, methane. And so I think it's been recognized that whatever we've learned on the ground and we measured, we can bring a major part of it by doing remotely, and that solves the problem of scaling, because we really cannot think about tropical forest. Majority of the countries in the tropical forest do not have national inventory to measure, and if they have, it's limited. It's few hundred plots. We really cannot solve this problem in this space. So I think we're moving forward in that direction, and I think there is a lot of investment in that area. And commercial sector has also come forward, and Collecting Planet is a good example of it, and few other groups. And they're bringing data sets to the community to be used. So,
Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick. Yeah, so I don't think you can ever get away from having, some plots. You gotta have some plots, but of course, yeah, with good remote sensing, you can limit the amount of plots you need and do it smarter. In terms of models with remote sensing, what I would like to see, what I'm trying to push us all towards is, overlaying more advanced models along with remote sensing to take into account like temporal and spatial information. And that's especially important in California, where you have fires and you have dead wood, and you need to carry that through time, and just snapshots from remote sensing has a real hard time capturing all of that dead wood. And so you got to kind of overlay models with that anyway.
Again, I can only speak for soil, but the answer the question is unanswerable without defining for what purpose. The aforementioned problem in soil is that soil carbon is underground, where satellites cannot see. So I run a proximal sensing company for a reason. I think it's very important. The question becomes, for what, though? People often talk about this dichotomy as like, oh, models are accurate or not accurate, as though that's a binary criteria, and it's like, absolutely not. There are many, many, many different complicated ways of describing this. And so the only way to say whether an existing approach is acceptable is to agree. We're talking about Vera VM42, and we're going to propagate this era through, and we're going to do a discount rate, and we're going to see if you have enough tons in your project to make money. But that requires all these other detailed discussions that are only really havable at the per application level. So, we have played our hand that we think proximal data in soil carbon is essential. How that will get expressed in the future is complex. I will say that 3 years ago, I had to spend a lot more time explaining to people why proximal data was important. I don't have to try very hard about that anymore. I have biogeochemical modeling companies as my customers because they need truth data. Of course they do, right? How could they not? So these technologies aren't competitors. It's the right tool for the right job. I'm encouraged that in order to describe a soil biogeochemical model as being accurate, you must be comparing it to ground truth data. That ground truth data generally does not exist in the world, which means if you're doing the comparison, hopefully you hired me to collect the ground truth data. And so at the very least, we're a long way of saying, broadly speaking, remote sensing data has much to offer by itself in soil carbon.
Okay, next question.
Hi, is this working okay? Thank you so much. It was great hearing from scientists and technologies. I'm up to here with lots of policy and finance this week. I am a tape and meter tropical forest ecologist, I guess. So I believe in plot data, but also believe in remote sensing. I now work for the Department of Defense. So I have two different kinds of ideas, I guess. One, I worked in RED a long time ago, before it was very popular, 15 years ago. There are a lot of us who worked in RED in Indonesia and Malawi and all over the world who have access to a lot of that ground truth data. there doesn't seem, in my mind, at least then, except for NatureServe, there aren't a lot of places, repositories that I know of, but there are still people out there working. There are all the local organizations that we worked with in Malawi and Indonesia are still out there on the ground. Those folks can be trained, are trained to use lots of technology and can provide that ground truth data. So I guess a question would be, are there, or maybe it's just a thought question, but are there repositories where we can put that kind of data? Does that help you with the remote sensing part? And the sort of second big idea is Department of Defense right now is the largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases, no big surprise, in the world, and we want to totally reverse that. So the shocking thing to me is with this administration, with the Biden administration, executive orders, but even before that, the services, all three branches of the services were very interested in, they're out there operating in the world. They believe they've got to reverse climate change, that we want to do that. So we actually have now targets for drawing down GHG emissions. For Navy, we have, so I'm with the Navy now, we actually have targets for drawing down greenhouse gas emissions through biosequestration, and we want to start to try to do that at the installation level. So I would love to talk about partnerships with California, with agencies, and I think we may be able to use federal agencies like DOD to do some of this work, because we just want to affect climate change, right? We're not going to buy and sell markets, or market credits, but we do want to know how much impact we're having.
I think you're going to find a lot of willing participants up here and in the room, but does anyone want to talk about the data repository question? I think, Sassan, you had a...
I think there are a lot of resources coming up. There are a lot of data archives, and now because of the cloud, we have this. One thing about our field is actually, which includes science and technology, is the transparency part of it. We really make things available. And so we put a data archives system for trees of the world. And recently Bezos has funded partially for that CTrees, and where we're actually putting a lot of data sets where every company, private or public, can actually use the data for validation. These are areas, and some countries, they came and actually delivered the data that meets our requirements to us to put, so we can actually do that. And I also think that, again, maybe, this is my mood today, I'm against dichotomies. I don't think we learn from plot data and build technology. Right now, TLS, terrestrial LiDAR system, is showing, and papers are coming, that a lot of our allometries that we estimate carbon on the ground are not correct. We don't even have really good data on wood density, how hard the woods are or not. So it is improving, and we learn from what measurement people have done on the ground, then, from kilometer to measuring tree heights, that is really wrong, and then they created laser finder, and now TLS. So I think this is a continuum. It's not either or, it's we learn from each other, and then we build this technology and then bring it in. So I think we should think of the problem like that. And as the technology matures, it replaces, and then other things comes in. So, and anyway.
Yeah, in terms of partnering with the Department of Defense, I think that's a great idea. Actually, one of the first analyses I did when I started working for CARB was just looking at fire in California and where it's occurring most, and I looked at by ownership, and military is the most frequently burned ownership in the state of California. Even though those fires don't get big, they burn frequently. So, yeah, we'd like to address that. And oh, the blue carbon side. Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, we have, that's also a new area that we're venturing into. But okay, so blue carbon. Well, okay, so I was going to say, well, I don't know. I was just going to say, in these installations, you have these landscape architects, right? And some of them are coming to, we have a wildfire and forest resilience task force in California. the next meeting is in Southern California, and I know that there's people from the Navy, the landscape architects going to that meeting, so that's like a good first foray into this partnership. We partner with feds all the time, of course, Forest Service and USDA, and so, yeah, let's talk.
I want to just grab one more question. It looks like we've got one there. Okay, perfect. 1 minute, so we're going to be quick on this. Oh, okay, sorry, lightning answers.
I'll try to keep it quick. My name is Whit. I work with TreeSwift. We are a sub-canopy inventory and MRV provider. There's such a spectrum of wonderful technologies that can stack really well together, and what's exciting to me is potential integration and stackability of data, right? We have scalable under canopy processes and measurements to high degrees of accuracy, which is needed especially in carbon, right? And we work quite extensively in timber. Can you speak to the opportunities that you all see for kind of cross-pollination between different MRV types and remote sensing, and how we can kind of collectively support both our customers and create impact in this space?
I mean, I can jump in there just, from the Vibrant Planet perspective, I think we're really interested in what TreeSwift is doing, right? And when we think about what we do and what Sassan does, right, getting at that canopy height, we want to get under the canopy. We want to get to the soil level, right? So getting all of us together on that complete picture of landscapes is critical for all of us to be successful and for us to really address climate change and measurably drive down atmospheric carbon and measurably produce socioecological benefits. So I think honestly, it's just getting those meetings together and figuring out that mechanism, right? It's a pilot, or it's a funded opportunity from the state of California or from the Department of Defense, right, to work together and prove out that these systems can be integrated. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room feel this, but depending on what you build on Mapbox or Esri, it can be harder to integrate. So if we have the chance to try to put it together, I think we just have to find that opportunity. And funders in the room, we need a chance to do that, but we need the resources to get together on a given landscape and give it a whirl. So please come to us.
In soil, a major gap that doesn't get talked about all that much is management data, which is incredibly complex because farming is incredibly complex in America. I mean, farming is incredibly complex everywhere. A lot of times, I think it's tempting to see that as a technology problem because, isn't there software that does that? And a thing we haven't talked about much, but I want to leave everybody with, is that many things which are easily perceived by tech people as technology problems are actually cultural problems. And not necessarily problems in the judgmental sense, but a cultural challenge. Lots and lots of farmers don't use software for farming, not because they don't know that there's software out there, but much deeper and more complex reasons. And ultimately in soil carbon, if we can't relate management practices in soil carbon, we only understand all that much. There's also an equity angle to this, so lower income farmers are less likely to use fancy software, right? Of course, mega gigantic corporate agribusinesses definitely use FMS technology. So applying that to a carbon markets context, who's going to be more available and competitive to a carbon market project developer? The farmer that has flawless boundaries in Esri, flawless, fertilizer patterns from years past, or the literal millions of people who are farming in a notebook. Management data is the bane of my existence. It's a major gap in anything soil.
Okay, well, I think we made it through. I'm sorry we missed your question. Come find us afterwards. Thank you all for being so attentive and for joining us in this lively discussion. And one more round of applause.
Hey, good to meet you.